So, it hasn't been since last October when I covered an unabashedly fun horror flick that didn't take itself too seriously, and since I think we're due a cheeky bit of respite at this point, let's look at a found footage livestream that serves as the perfect comedic companion piece to the spooky shenanigans of Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. Written, directed, produced, and edited by husband and wife duo Joseph and Vanessa Winter, with Joseph also serving as lead actor and composer, Deadstream tells the story of a cancelled influencer called Sean Rudy, who attempts a shameless comeback in the form of a ghost hunting livestream that sees him explore the aptly named Death Manor, which is said to be haunted by multiple spirits who died on the property. What unfolds is a zany, self-aware B-movie where Sean continuously spews out to every obnoxious influencer cliche imaginable, while contending with an increasingly demonic threat that indirectly forces him to confront the demons of his own past.
Let's demonetize this bitch.
At its core, Deadstream is a fairly lighthearted homage to Blair Witch and Evil Dead that's framed within a blatantly sarcastic South Park-esque parody of vapid, amoral YouTube egomaniacs who are so performatively fake and depressingly insincere after having their humanity stripped of them by the soul-sucking evil of the algorithm that even I'll admit I'm not immune to. Come on, you know the game at this point. Comment, subscribe, and commit war crimes to that like button.
I don't care about money. I care about you.
Now, obviously from that description, I understand it's quite the ask that you swallow your pride to engage with what unfolds, because Sean does begin as an admittedly irritating character whose gleeful excitement at being remonetized by YouTube after his viral 18-minute nothing apology video evidently echoes Logan Paul's notoriously contemptible Death Forest controversy. However, if you are willing to be curious and stick with it, you'll perhaps start to find Sean more pitifully endearing as it progresses when he begins softening his persona with small touches of vulnerability, even if he never drops the act completely, much to his own selfish detriment. The way I see it, while the film is definitely critical of Sean, if you begin to pick away at the layers behind the point and laugh at the annoying influencer shtick, Deadstream serves more broadly as a lampoon on the increasingly desensitized and undignified performance culture manifested from the demands of the internet, to the point it softly interrogates the real person behind the problematic mask. I mean, as a creator myself, I can't help but see it as a sort of existential indictment on the dehumanized performance monkeys we've ultimately made ourselves out to be. That said, if you simply want to channel a creator you loathe into Sean and watch them get their comeuppance, he does get waterboarded by his own piss near the end. Now, on the topic of obnoxious influencer cliches, of course this video would not be complete without our sponsors at Vessi. February means weather whiplash, rain, stormy rain, surprise snow, mud, and icy sidewalks. And what that means is that you need a shoe for every eventuality. So look no further than Vessi Stormburst, your always reliable, low maintenance, stylishly fitting, and cozy all-weather ride or die. I have been using both high top and low top Vessi Stormburst for a few years now, and they are my absolute essential when taking cheddar on long, adventurous walks and braving the turbulent conditions that can change in an instant. It has practically rained every day in 2026 where I'm from, so I have my Stormburst shoes sitting by my front door and always ready for action, with their 100% waterproof design, durable lightweight fit, all-day comfort, and rugged grip for tackling treacherous terrain, particularly the deceptively deep puddles and mud. Vessi empowers both you and I with the confidence to not let the miserable weather affect our mood so we can make the most of every day. So don't wait for sunny skies, Stormburst is made for the messy middle of winter, 100% waterproof, ultra comfortable, and ready for every obstacle. Snag 15% off your first pair at vessi.com/ryanhollinger today, plus free shipping, a 1-year warranty, and hassle-free returns. The setup to Death Manor sees Sean explain that the house was built by a rich Mormon in 1880 for his daughter Mildred Pratt, who was a struggling poet and social outcast who hanged herself 8 years later after the sudden death of her brief distant lover Lars Jorgensen. Ever since, many came to believe that the property was cursed after 11 further fatalities occurred in the intervening years until the house was boarded up in 1956. It's now said that the spirits of the deceased continue to roam the house as victims of Mildred, who collects souls to build up the family she never had. From here, Sean arrives, trespasses, locks himself in, and effectively challenges himself to provoke and disturb the spirits any way he can through a number of crass, phony summoning rituals and seances, knowing full well nothing is going to happen. Which of course, surprise surprise, isn't actually the case when the various victims he references begin to manifest as he described. Now, I think it's evident at this point that I wouldn't call the film tense nor scary, although it might be effective for some. It's definitely a farcical comedy first and foremost, as Sean tries to play up every nothing event as a cinematic spectacle in his own words, as if referencing those painfully awful 3 AM supernatural challenge videos that people like J-Station used to do. Oh, you know what I mean. That's an era of YouTube I'm sure we all wish to forget.
This is just the simple Jesus Christ cross, but it's upside down, guys. That means it's satanic.
Garlic may not work on ghosts, but if there's one thing the movies have taught me, it's that holy water will fuck.
In fact, as depressingly tragic as it sounds, it's almost hashtag impossible to call Deadstream a parody when it is just straight up identical to every single one of those videos. The lore itself is fairly decent at giving us a context for the creative hauntings that emerged predominantly in the second half, but what I feel distinctly holds it together is how unserious Sean ultimately is towards everything that happens, even when shit does hit the fan. I mean, it is perfectly hilarious that he is more terrified by the idea of his live stream cutting out than he is by the threat of the demonic entities within. Now, as a longtime fan of the mockumentary and found footage subgenre, I think what's interesting about the film is that if you mirror it against the climax of the Blair Witch Project, it frames it as a sort of tragic indictment on the superficial state of modern streaming and vlog culture. It actually becomes acutely meta if you look at Deadstream as an understated commentary on the loss of innocence within the format itself, where today's media consumption relies so heavily on sensationalist and performative practices to bolster the engagement of the story that it's now become increasingly difficult to capture the same raw, natural authenticity that used to wholeheartedly define this type of storytelling. In other words, Sean's aggressive participation undermines the sinister tragic tale he's trying to tell, because by making himself the primary subject, the ego and sincerity that bleeds through makes any attempt at fear feel artificial, thus fitting the current culture of content creation brain rot. From my perspective as someone who ruminates way too much on how media has changed throughout my life, I know for a fact that I am really overthinking this, but I just love how clever the humor is at forcefully seeding influencer culture into what is ultimately a classical horror format. At the same time, it actually works to the film's effect by indirectly sustaining doubt over whether or not what's happening is real or a fabrication by Sean to generate engagement. It's the same deception used in Gonjiam Haunted Asylum, which sets up the live stream only to reveal it to be a hoax planted by the host until the real haunting rears its ugly head and bitch slaps the conniving little shits in the face. Now, as I said, it does require a fair bit of empathy, open-mindedness, and, well, tolerance to engage with Sean's initial migraine of a character, since you're glued to him for the entire runtime. While I will admit the profound, shameless ignorance of his behavior never goes away, to reframe a classical phrase, the fact that he never develops into a fully well-rounded person by the end suits the notion that instead of dying as a victim to the algorithm, Sean lives long enough to become a villain of it. By maintaining his persona to the bitter end, Sean is established as just too far gone in his obsession with the machine that he lacks the introspection to truly atone for his poor choices and behavior, that I couldn't help but feel a modest amount of pity for the grave he's dug for himself. There is nuance to be found in how guarded he appears when responding to triggering comments about his personal life, such as his partner leaving him, that I feel allude to some deeper emotional complexities we're never privy to, that suggest that behind the facade, he's a sad, lonely man who lives and dies purely on the validation of strangers to fill the void where his soul used to be.
I'm Sean Ruddy, and I'm a piece of trash.
In fact, if this is truly the case, Sean projects his own situation onto Mildred, describing her as lonely and pathetic, and ostracized by her community for her weird talents, so to speak. Thus, she spent her days isolated and focused entirely on her poems.
Hey, Mildred! Believe me when I say I understand why you do what you do. But
while we never learn anything about Sean, there is something to be said about him still living in his childhood and reenacting immaturity to compensate for potential insecurities he's never properly dealt with, alluded to with comments about his devout religious upbringing and being bullied in school.
Oh shit. He's gonna die.
That said, it is very likely I'm just trying to project meaning onto his on-screen shallowness that isn't actually there, but I appreciate that there's just enough subtlety behind Joseph Winter's committedly sardonic performance to make Sean sympathetic, to challenge whether or not he is capable of sincerity. In fact, he almost admits as much when, by the end, he is faced with his ultimate challenge, when he seemingly accepts his ordeal as karma for his own actions and decides to revise his apology under the assumption he is probably going to die. However, on the surface, for as genuine as his climactic apology appears to be in the moment, despite his constant excuses that undermine his efforts, when he does end up surviving, he basically reverts back to the same behavior, revealing he faked sincerity for the purposes of survival, deservingly resulting in him receiving his long-awaited comeuppance. Anyway, events begin to take a turn when a mysterious fan called Chrissy shows up and encourages Sean via his fans' insistence to summon Mildred for the stream, eventually causing Chrissy to become possessed and attack Sean, prompting him to instinctively kill her before her body goes missing. Of course, it's not hard to work out that Chrissy is actually the demonic spirit of Mildred, who proceeds to persistently torment Sean along with the other various spirits, a la the second half of Evil Dead 2, as Sean humorously and stubbornly attempts to maintain the stream because, let's face it, he's indebted to his sponsorship overlords. Remember to head over to vessi.com/ryanhollinger to get 15% off your first order at checkout. As various hauntings ensue, it gradually comes to light through the power of the internet that the reason Mildred has returned is because Sean indirectly desecrated a totem designed to protect inhabitants from evil, and now must provide a new sacrifice in the form of flesh, or may his soul be damned. The comedy is played off very well throughout, to the point Sean even acknowledges the truthful absurdity of how fast the internet can hunt down information, as he then attempts to bail out the fucking window, only to stumble back inside because, say it with me kids, the stream must go on. I obviously don't want to spoil the jokes, but I love how he constantly tries to flog his sponsors and merch, keep the video ad-friendly by avoiding swear words, plays his own theme music through an audio device, tapes a GoPro to his spear when fighting Mildred, and even plants a camera on her when he gets the upper hand, just so that he can get the action from every angle. However, what's particularly notable to me is how it toys with the hilarious symbolism that Sean has already lost his soul to the power of the internet, that the literal demonic presence is unable to possess him. In my headcanon, that's why I think he's immune to Mildred's influence. She sold her soul to the devil, but Sean arguably sold his to something much worse. It even goes as far as to draw parallels between them when Sean comes to realize that Mildred is not trying to build a family, but rather build an audience, suggesting she's motivated by bitterness to have the very same influence as Sean. In a way, Sean is a bit of a hostage to his audience because he practically does everything they say in the chat, whereas Mildred has built an audience that is purely a hostage to her. In fact, if you really think I'm grasping at straws, Sean finds a spell with the literal description, influence others with the power of your word. What is so poetically hilarious to me is that Mildred feels entitled to an audience despite ultimately being just as much of a hack as Sean. Her poems are said to be very explicitly quite shit. She ends up being just as petty as him, and it culminates in Sean entering a final battle with Mildred in a bid to get her cancelled, but not before apologizing for his past actions like racial insensitivity and paying a homeless man to fight him, resulting in the man being hospitalized only for Sean to be acquitted. Eventually, after much carnage, Sean does eventually banish Mildred back to hell where she belongs, when realizing that his flesh ritual simply required him to surrender a physical part of himself, that being his finger, exactly how Mildred made a pact with the devil to begin with. Battered and bruised, Sean ends the stream praising his fans, thanking his sponsors, and seemingly promising to do better as a creator in the future. However, making the same flesh sacrifice as Mildred causes him to grow the same demonic finger as her, suggesting he's taken her place as the demonic influencer of the house, as he's confronted by Mildred's victims who hand him his karma for disturbing their slumber, all in the name of precious, precious views.